will get started here. Yeah, let me just double check here. Okay. So welcome, as we've been talking about, to our first ever OLLI Extras. You are signing into the last of our classes this month. We are so excited to have brought you 6 of the finest classes that OLLI's have to offer. And I have no doubt this one will just round it off in a fantastic way. We are joining you from North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Minnesota, and Iowa. A couple housekeeping notes. We are going to ask you to keep your buttons on mute, please, and we will mute the class when Mr. Pins is ready to go. We respect the time that our instructors have given us, and we plan to finish on time. If you have questions, there will be a time for questions, and if you're like me and you forget what your question was going to be, feel free to put it in the chat, and we will make sure that it gets answered. If we don't get to your question by the end of this session, we will forward them to the instructor, and he will be able to answer those questions for you. I do have one thing I need to acknowledge, as Bailey may have this too, I'm not sure, but we need to acknowledge first and foremost that this program comes to you from the ground, which is the homeland of the Oceti-Sakowin, the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. The Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of South Dakota honors and appreciates the Indigenous people who have the longest relationship to this place. Now I'm going to introduce you to Bailey, who is the OLLI director at Bismarck State College, and Bailey will introduce you to our speaker. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Bismarck State College veteran OLLI instructor, Mr. Pat Pins. He was born and raised in South Dakota. He received his bachelor's degree in social science and English from Northern State University in 1970. He taught in the social studies department of Mandan High School for 34 years and coached competitive speech. He is still an assistant speech coach at Washburn High School. Pat is very active in the Bismarck Mandan Retired Teachers Association and was elected to the North Dakota Speech and Theater Association's Hall of Fame in 2000. He is an instructor for OLLI at Bismarck State College and is a very active member on our advisory council. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Pat Pins.
Thank you, Bailey. Thank you very much. And I'm really excited about doing this. This is the first time, but you know, they say you're never too old to learn new tricks or try them anyway. And so I'm excited about this, and I wish we had time to chat about this and that and whatever. I have loved teaching. I wanted to be a teacher from the time I was a 7th grader, and I luckily had some very good Dominican nuns and priests who molded me and pushed me the right direction and got me down that road of education itself. And so that's why I'm still teaching, is that I still feel that I have information to bring to people, to share with people. And I thought the first place to start with this class is that I think we should find out exactly why I wanted to do this. Very simply, I got 4 reasons. Number 1 is that I was looking for a class myself. And of course, nobody came along teaching about it, presenting it. So I said, I guess I got to do it for myself. Then, of course, there were the stories that came out of Canada last year over all of these unmarked graves of these poor, innocent children. And of course, we always know children are always the most victimized unit in our society because they are the most powerless. And it doesn't matter what their skin color is. They are totally powerless, basically. Then, of course, with our Pope, I'm a cradle Catholic, and with the Pope traveling on his what I call journey of forgiveness across Canada to these Indigenous peoples itself, that it's very appropriate and it's very timely in a sense itself that we be talking about this and discussing it. And then, of course, last but certainly not least is that take a look at our Secretary of Interior, Deb Holland. She is the first Native American to hold a cabinet post. and well worth it. She is from the Pueblo tribe. She is a 35th generation New Mexican, and she has a mother who was a wave, served in the Navy, and a father who was a Marine. All right. And so she certainly has the credentials and the experience. So I have a friend of mine who teaches at the University of Mary in Bismarck, who forwarded something to me that I thought would be a good little clip, a 5-minute clip with an interview with her. So I'll have Bailey play that for you quickly, and that'll get us into this whole thing.
There was shocking news out of Canada last year involving reports of mass graves on the grounds of former Canadian boarding schools for Indigenous children, many run by the Catholic Church. Native children who attended these schools were forcibly taken from their families to be assimilated, as they put it at the time. When these mass graves were found, the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Deb Holland, called for an investigation into similar boarding schools in the U.S. At a recent press conference, her department released the first report from that investigation. It showed that for close to 2 centuries, the U.S. operated or actively supported more than 400 of these schools across various states. And officials have identified 53 schools with marked or unmarked burial sites with the remains of children who died there. James LaBelle Sr., who goes by Jim, attended a residential school in Alaska and spoke at the press conference.
I'm a product of 10 years of boarding school myself, going in at the age of 8 years old. My brother was 6, and I learned everything about the European American culture, its history, language, civilizations, math, science, but I didn't know anything about who I was as a Native person. I came out not knowing who I was.
We called Interior Secretary Deb Holland to learn more about the findings, and she started our conversation by explaining her personal connection to the story.
You know, it's important that this issue is coming to light. You know, my grandparents, like Jim, both of my grandparents were taken from their homes when they were 8 years old as well, and they were gone for 5 years from their families and their communities. That's a formidable years in a child's life, and I can understand how Jim said he didn't know anything about himself as a Native person. It's devastating. It's important that people can have a voice in the issue, but Michelle, it's more important that our country realizes and understands this history, because I think it's important for every single American to know what happened.
Can you talk more about the government's role in the proliferation of these schools? What impact did federal law and policy have in their creation?
I mean, it stemmed from the fact that the United States government needed land. And from the time the Europeans came to this continent, started colonizing the Indians, it was really all about the land. And sooner or later, it was incumbent on the U.S. government to say, we need this land. How are we going to displace all of these Indians so that we can take their land? I mean, that was essentially it. And there was a man named
Richard Henry Pratt, Captain Richard Henry Pratt.
Yes, Richard Henry Pratt, who coined the phrase something like, I'm not going to quote it exactly.
I can quote it for you. There was a speech by Captain Richard Henry Pratt in 1892 where he used this phrase that became well known, which is kill the Indian in him and save the man, delivered it at this National Conference of Charities and Correction in Denver. But you know what, Madam Secretary, what struck me about that speech is that people realized it was a call for assimilation. But if you look at the rest of the speech, he seemed to see it as a humane response instead of committing active genocide. I mean, it seemed to me his argument there was, well, instead of maintaining a policy of actually killing people, maybe it would be better. It seemed to me that he was projecting this as humane. Do you recall it that way? Was this sort of projected that way?
Well, I think to put that in context, they had already committed genocide against the Indians, and they worked very hard to kill as many off as they could, but it was impossible to kill them all off, because we persevered through all of those eras. So finally, it was thought, if they can take the children away from their families, assimilate them, turn them essentially into white people, then they wouldn't have that problem anymore. Clearly, it didn't work. And we still have distinct tribes, tribal nations that have a proud culture and a proud heritage. And today we're doing everything we can to support them.
So this is just the first volume of what will be a multi-part investigation. Can you tell us what some of the next steps will be?
Thank you. Well, we are going to embark on a year-long essential listening tour. It's called The Road to Healing, where we travel around, speak to survivors and descendants, get them on record. We'd like to create an oral history. Our elders are not going to live forever. We want to make sure that they have an opportunity to speak about this issue if that's what they choose to do. And so we want to document that history in a way that's respectful and informative.
But as you know, as we said earlier, there are those who say this is in the past, it's best left in the past, and there are people who are pushing back against interrogations of other aspects of American history, saying that it's divisive, it's picking at old sores. To those who take that point of view, that this is old history, we don't really need to investigate this anymore, that this is just divisive, how do you respond to that?
Well, of course, you heard Jim LaBelle give his testimony at our press conference, and you likely heard him give another testimony at the legislative hearing. Tell him that it's an old sore. Tell somebody like Jim LaBelle that his history doesn't matter and that the pain that he experienced firsthand isn't worth remedying. And it's incumbent on me to ensure that I am paying attention to that and that I am doing all I can to make sure that we can heal and get people past that pain.
Before we let you go, Madam Secretary, as we mentioned earlier, you're going to be traveling the country to speak with survivors of these experiences on a tour you're calling The Road to Healing. This has got to be, that's going to obviously be a painful and emotional experience for you, but is there any part of it that you're looking forward to as you embark on this?
I always enjoy traveling. I always enjoy visiting with people in Indian country. You know, we're all relatives, and so I'll look forward to connecting face to face with folks like that. Above all, I need to hear those stories myself. There was a time in my college career where I would go out to Laguna. My grandmother lived in the village of Mesita, and I would go out every single weekend and take my tape recorder, and my grandmother and I would have conversations for hours and hours. And several times her time in boarding school came up. And although she never spoke, she never told me about any negative things that happened to her, except for the fact of how lonely she was, having to be away from her mother for 5 years. And I feel like that helped her to heal, you know, just to be able to get it out. And I recognize that in my own grandmother, and I hope that I can recognize that in some of the people who will have opportunities to speak with me as I'm out there on the road.
That was the Secretary of the...
All right. I think the first thing to think about a little bit is, you know, put the shoe on the other foot. Ask yourself this: how would it have impacted you as a 5-year-old to be taken away from your mother and dad, or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10-year-old, and be taken away from them for how long, you don't know. And so that's what I'm going to try to expose today to you, is some of the things that happened. All right. This is what I call a conspiracy theory, short and simple. It was a conspiracy on behalf of the white man to gut the Native American, to gut the culture of them. All right. We can't change their color, but we can change their culture. And so these were some of the quotes that I came across very quickly. The only way to save them is to destroy them. We have an Indian problem. The only way to save them is to eliminate them. I saw these phrases again and again and again. And I want you to know that in prepping for this class, which I taught last week to a group of 25 people here at the college. It was painful me to go through it. And it was painful in a sense that it's not always refreshing to take a look at yourself in the mirror and realize that you didn't do it. You're not responsible, but your ancestors were responsible for this. And, you know, the old saying fits here. Those who deny their past are doomed to repeat their past. And that has happened already, let's face it, with Native Americans. The white man took an attitude toward this issue of saying, okay, we've done this with blacks, we've done it with other minorities, we can do it with Native Americans. How ironic. The old saying fits here, doesn't it? The first shall be last and the last first. They were the first to be here in this part of the world, and yet they didn't gain citizenship until 1924 with the Curtis Act. How sad, right? All right, they haven't even been citizens 100 years as of yet at this point in time. So I want to talk about that conspiracy, and then we'll get into the PowerPoint and go right through it. I put together kind of a pie chart, and we'll go through it. And I'm hoping to leave you time for questions at the end. If I don't, I'm sorry, because if this was a 2-hour class, and I used the full 2 hours itself, okay? But this was definitely a government-endorsed program to take and to teach these people, all right, the white man's way. Whether it be through religion or governmental structure or indoctrination, whatever the case may be. I have to tell you that more than one time, I thought that the similarities between these boarding schools and the concentration camps were very eerie at times. I'm sad to say that, but it was eerie at times that this was some of the kind of Nazi kind of things, programs or tactics that had been employed with the Nazis also and the Jews itself. Now understand that this issue we're talking about, boarding schools, really ran a gamut of like the early 1800s, 1819, really officially, all the way up to 1969 itself. There still are a few of those boarding schools, a handful of them that operate. Matter of fact, one of them still here in North Dakota at Fort Totten itself. But like she had said, that at the height, there were over 400 boarding schools across this country. Wherever there were natives, there would be a boarding school, okay? They basically took children from anywhere from, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years of age, and they might keep them all the way up to 17, because the goal in the sense itself is that they wanted to graduate them, okay? And then they wanted them to be able to go back to their own reservation if it was an offsite, okay, school, and go back to the reservation and to maintain the white man's ways in itself. I should tell you that there were 2 types of boarding schools. There was the on-site, which was actually on the reservation itself, and there was the off-site, okay? And probably the most successful was the off-site one, because they totally disconnected them from anything that was linked to the Native Americans, all right, to their culture, all right, to their system in a sense itself. And they also became more of a focal point for the community to take a look at and see what was happening with these children at these boarding schools itself. I want you to also understand that this is not the kind of issue that we just can put the blame upon the federal government, okay? Because certainly the Congress played a major role. They had to put the bucks out there, okay, and legislate this to cause it to happen itself. But there were many states, all right, all of the states in one way or the other that took an active role in this type of program, because you have to understand they were going to have to supply the land, they were going to have to supply provide the construction to build the buildings itself, the administration, the teachers, the staff, those kind of things. And so all of that was going to have to be carried on behalf of the states itself. So I just want to make sure that you understand that this is a shared issue in a sense itself, that we need to not just blame the US Congress, all right, because it's always easy to put the blame on government, but state legislatures did their fair share, their fair part. And I don't have time to talk about that and elaborate it, but there's plenty of stuff out there to go ahead and take a look at so you understand that. So I think what we should do is move right into here and see where we're going. Let's see, are we all right here? Just a second. Okay, yeah, this is kind of an overview of the cycle of change in itself. What was actually happening, that these things were all endorsed kind of methods to deal with the Native Americans. There was something to deal with their physical life itself, their spiritual life, associations they made with other tribes. Because remember, they would have there would be other children at this school that was from another tribe and spoke a completely different language. So you can imagine how that made for creating some kind of obstacles to communicating with them and understanding what was going on itself. Please understand that there was education involved in it. And it was not the only, not everywhere, okay, but it was not only the book kind of learning, but it was the practical skills kind of learning itself too. So believe it or not, they were actually trying to empower these children to be able to make a living for themselves, because they're totally taking them away from their culture and ingraining them into the white man's culture. And so they had to educate them in such a way so that they could sustain their life, and also so that they weren't a burden on the government. You know, that the government was not going to have to take over and support them and provide programs to, you know, to have them exist as human beings. The emotional issue, I'll talk more about that later on, but yes, there would be incidents of suicide, there would be incidents of depression, there would be no treatment for them whatsoever and stuff like that. So kids were doing this, all right? They were basically ending their own life to remove themselves from this pain, because they had, I mean, they're experiencing this disconnection with their family and this disconnection with their culture, all right? And then trying to learn new associations, all right, and learn the white man's way itself and conform to the white man's way. It's tragic. There's no other way to describe it. It's extremely tragic itself. Another issue we'll talk about will be time and the concept of time and measurement itself. These would have to be new things learned by them, and so very totally different from their own lifestyle itself. We'll talk also about rituals, okay? The rituals of the white man's way as opposed to rituals, all right, daily rituals with the white man's way itself, or with the red man's way itself. And then we'll talk about something I found intriguing and never thought about, and that is the idea of taking these natives from their circular world to the linear world of the white man itself. And so we'll talk more about that and deal with that and expose that as much as we possibly can. All right. So that's kind of just a rough outline of the kind of things we'll hit and talk about and deal with as we go through this. Okay. All right. So physical changes. Okay. And we tried to put in some pictures here for things for you to take a look at so you can see, okay, this is the way they look traditionally as a member of the tribe, all right, on the left-hand side of your screen. And then on the right-hand side is basically the white man's way, how they were put into uniforms and regimented. I mean, and just take a look at it, okay? We don't want the long hair. We don't want the feather in your hair. We don't want you wearing these heavy robes. We don't want beads. We don't want any kind of, you're not going to be wearing that loincloth, all right? You're not going to be, you know, because they were, some white men considered them naked savages in a sense itself. And there'll be no face painting, because remember, the white man called it war paint. Even though they painted themselves up at times just for certain celebrations, for let's say the ghost dance or things like that, they considered it war paint. That was the white man's label, that this was war paint. And then, of course, no native tongues. Take them away from that. I mean, they actually, if they caught the children speaking in a native tongue, they could be beaten for that. And I want you to know they had jails in some of these boarding schools, and children were put in the jails themselves. I remember reading one.
I know we're having some trouble hearing. Hold on, we'll try to get the connection back. Bailey, can you see what the connection issue is? Looks like they're working on it. Sorry about this. All right. Likely they're coming out and we'll come back in. Sorry for the delay. I see Bailey's still with us, so they should be getting back on here pretty quickly. My apologies.
Thea,
Yes,
I came on late, for which I apologize. Are you in South Dakota?
we are. Mr. Pins is coming to you from North Dakota, though.
I see. Okay.
Sorry for the delay. Gosh. I see Bailey now. Looks like we're getting back here.
It'll come back.
See, it's just part of the technology.
It is.
One of the things we talk about at OLLI ISU is to be patient with yourself, be patient with the instructors, and be patient with your fellow class members, because technology is not always our friend.
We try.
We do the best we can.
Mhm. I can see Bailey's on the screen. They're trying. I think they don't have sound. Oh, she's thumbing up, thumbs up. That's right. Sherry said without technology, we'd never have this opportunity. That's for sure.
I see a suggestion. If they have a cell phone handy, they can still project the video part, meaning we could see the handouts or the PowerPoint, but they could call in for the audio part.
Sure.
And call and use the telephone to broadcast the audio, and it would still broadcast to all the rest of us on Zoom.
looks like,
Okay, Thea, can you hear me?
yes, I can.
Okay, so I have my computer in our room here, but
Mhm.
Pat's is on a separate computer. We
Yep.
can't get the audio to work, so I might just transfer him onto my computer if that works.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
I don't know, all of a sudden we lost our internet for a minute and then we can't get the audio to connect.
That happens. We all
Do you want to
understand.
make me a presenter?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry about
Okay.
that.
No, that's okay.
Hold on. Sorry, Bailey.
Right.
There we go.
Okay, what slide were you on?
I just finished the very first one.
This one?
No, the next one. Oh. Yeah, we're there. Here we are.
Here, okay.
Okay.
Okay, are we good?
We're great.
Okay, you can go ahead and continue.
Okay. All right. Sorry about the little issue there, but such as it is with technology, right? Thank God Bailey knows what she's doing and we're back on the road and moving and going again. So we were talking about, of course, the changes, and I gave you that rough little outline on where we were going with this and talking about it. And I had Bailey put this picture in very simply. It was in one of the books that I used. And hard to believe it's the same person, isn't it? All right, take a look at it and you can see the change that is there. And of course, that's supposed to make him a better person. All right. I mean, the guy even looks more white than he does as a red man there, if you take a look at it. And very simply, the sad thing of it is that, okay, this is one aspect of what happened to these Native Americans, all right, is not only these physical changes, but we really can't very well gauge what were the emotional changes within them. And there had to be a long list of emotional changes. And I talked to you a little bit about that, about the idea of some committing suicide, some turning to alcohol, to drugs, whatever it may be, some escape mechanism to get away from the white man's ways itself. Okay. Let's talk about the association changes, okay? I mentioned to you earlier about, imagine these children are thrown together in a cloistered situation, really, all right, in this boarding school itself. And they were going to have to live with these other members of the tribes, of other tribes itself. It wasn't always guaranteed that if they had siblings, that sibling would end up at the very same boarding school. Matter of fact, there were instances where I read about where they tried to separate them because they didn't want them to have any links, any connections, any associations whatsoever with, okay, their past and with their culture itself. And so basically, they're just trying to walk them again away from their red man's ways, walk toward the white man ways itself, all right? And so that you're going to see that there's going to be hostilities that develop, all right? There will be conflicts that develop in these schools. And then you wonder why the kids rebelled and why they ended up subjecting to this corporal punishment in the sense itself. Not justifiable, but that always seems to be the best way out, is to is to beat them, all right? Look how the Nazis beat the Jews and persecuted the Jews itself. Same kind of thing itself, all right? And so basically, I think the white man considered this kind of a war in a sense itself. And that's why I put it down there, that the red man's ways was a war. Remember, as they talked earlier about, it was mentioned about the idea that Miss Deb Holland mentioned about the idea of land itself. And that is really what this was. You remember from your history, from your studies and things like that, you heard about something called manifest destiny. And so that's really what the government was trying to do here, is that we need to take this land away from them. We need to settle the frontier as soon as we possibly can. And that would come, about 1820, somewhere around there, when if they said, go west, young man, you better get out your kayak or canoe, because all there was the great big ocean out there. And so this was a way to take that land away from them, to take the culture away from them, and to manifest ourselves as quickly as we possibly can from coast to coast itself. Part of that, of course, was this concern on behalf of the white man's government, that if we don't stabilize things here as quick as we possibly can, we could again be subjected to being overtaken again by some foreign power itself. You know, remember, we had to fight not one Revolutionary War, we had to fight a second one in the War of 1812 itself. And of course, who was to know that the Revolutionary War itself, that our own Civil War was going to come about a few years down the road itself. So we need to stabilize this country. We need to control everyone that is in it. And because of their cultural differences, and so different, their language is so different than the English language, and the English language so different from theirs, that this was a way to indoctrinate them, brainwash them, cleanse them of the red man ways itself, take them away from that. So no respect for it whatsoever, no caring for it, no interest in it, just take them away from it and walk them toward the white man's valley. Okay, spiritual changes. And this order that I'm going through is just a random kind of thing when you take a look at it and we go through it itself, all right? But this was another way, okay, remember there were several groups that were involved as missionaries. It was not only just the Catholics, all right, it was the Mennonites, it was the Quakers, it was the Methodist Episcopals, that were various religious groups, okay? And they were interested because of two things. Number one, the government was going to pay them, all right, the federal government would pay them for coming in and teaching these children. But number two, it was a way to take them away from their native beliefs, okay? Because remember, they were polytheistic. They believed in many spirits, many gods in a sense itself. So this was a way to take them away from those spiritual beliefs that they had in a sense itself, non-Christian beliefs, okay? And to Christianize them and bring them toward the one true God. Monotheism, okay? Replacing polytheism itself. And of course, so you had priests and you had nuns that as missionaries came in there and with their rosary beads and their prayer books and the Bibles, okay? And like I said, other religious groups were doing this also. And the subtext of it was that they were trying to teach them morals, okay? You know, because man is so different from all the other animals because, of course, he has he possesses logos. He has that ability to logically deduce something, and he can figure out and know the difference between right and wrong. And that's what these Christian missionaries were doing in itself, was trying to teach them, okay, that they had a soul, that this was their physical life, but a spiritual life was coming, and they needed to learn morals and abide by those morals. Again, this is more of the white man's way, the white man's regimentation in a sense itself, teaching them to pray, okay, teaching them spiritual beliefs in a sense itself. And the ironic thing about it is that here they're trying to teach them to act morally, and yet some of them, not all of them, I want to make sure you understand that, some of them were acting very immoral. All right. And we'll talk later about some of that abuse that went on, not only the physical, but the sexual abuse that went on itself. So here was a picture again for you to see. And this is just one. There were many of them, okay, where they would have organized prayer. They'd be using their rosary beads and things like this and going to mass. They regularly, of course, went to mass. Okay, educational changes. So what they did is that there was not only the idea, okay, of teaching them, you know, the white man's way as far as a formal education. So learning to read and write, and to become literate and learn English itself, all right? There was also the idea of how they behave in a meal situation itself. And so they had to be taught proper manners. Remember, these natives were used to sitting around a bonfire, sitting in their teepee, okay, on the ground, all right, on the floor itself, the ground, all right, and eating with their hands, okay? That's short and simple, okay? So now they had to be taught that European way of table manners, using eating utensils, a formal way, all right, speaking in a certain way itself. And of course, there was exposing children to literature, okay, so that they could read stories about other cultures, not about natives, all right, but read about European stories or European authors and things like that. And so you had them taking them, trying to take them away from nature, all right, because this was a disconnect from the land. You know, they're so rooted to the land because they sleep on it, they eat off of the land itself, okay? They ride horse across the land itself. They know how to read the forces of nature, okay? Just because they live in it all the time. You know, it's kind of like the instincts that animals possess itself. We don't possess those instincts, okay? Because we operate from learned behavior. We are taught things from the very, very beginning. Whereas these natives are surviving out in the wilds of nature, all right? Just like other animals that are out there. And that's why the white man considered him an animal, because he had to live. He lived by the rules of nature, by dealing with the elements of nature, the forces of nature itself. And having the associations they did with animals. I mean, look at their association with bison and how they used every part of the bison for survival itself, and how they drove these herds and killed these herds and used every part of them, all right, basically for survival. Okay, that's short and simple. But it's a very interesting story of how they could read so much about nature, which they had to, okay, just for the purpose of survival itself. And yet that again was part of that education, that indoctrination, all right, that cleansing, that wiping away by the white man of the culture of Native Americans. No matter what the tribe is, we want to take them and purge them, plunge them away, take them away from those forces of nature and their own surroundings, their own culture, and take them toward the white man's way of life, all right? Okay, next here. The emotional changes. I said that, of course, we don't have really anything documented about this. We're just surmising. I shouldn't say anything, but we have limited because, of course, there was no help for them, all right? As a matter of fact, there wasn't really as much physical help for those children, all right? In other words, I'm saying as far as the doctoring, the nursing, that kind of help that they got was pretty limited. You know, I mean, these kids were going to end up sometimes because the buildings that they were in were not properly insulated, or they may not have enough proper clothes or blankets or whatever, that they would sometimes end up crawling into bed with each other just from that body heat, exchange of body heat, to help them stay warm itself. Now, of course, you know what that did. That just set up a stage for communicable diseases to be caught that much easier, no matter what it may be. I mean, let's face it, we had smallpox and we had chickenpox, and, you know, we had trachoma, which was an eye disease, all right, that could have killed them in the end itself. It blurred their vision. And so the poor kids, they have trouble enough trying to understand white man's language and white man ways. Now they've got vision problems, okay? And that comes from trachoma. And of course, tuberculosis, that was very prevalent also. There was no treatment for these diseases. And the treatment that they received was pretty limited. There wasn't a lot of money that the government was investing, all right? They just figured that, okay, if they got sick and died, that was just one less native to worry about, one less Indian to worry about, okay? So let happen will may happen itself. So we really had, like I said, we don't have much documented, but we really had mental health crisis, all right, for these young children, okay, that are experiencing this disconnect from their culture. Okay, ritual changes, of course, boy, get on top of it right now. The white man is not going to let them have any of these ghost dances. And of course, we know that peyote played an important part of ritual for them as far as celebrations were concerned. Remember, they had their medicine man. And if you got sick, then the medicine man was involved in rituals and smoke, all right? Smoke was so important to the rituals of Native Americans itself. And fire was also part of that ritual and things like that. Now, there were also rattles, and they also had other things that they used as far as ritual is concerned. But anything that was tied to Native American rituals was taken away from them. And I had Bailey put these pictures in for you to take a look at it, okay? Okay, we're going to take you away from celebrations and rituals of whether it be for the living or the dying for the natives, and we're going to put you into rituals. There's an example of the washroom itself. And then you see them all sitting around a nice tablecloth table. And then you see, of course, that the people who are serving, all right, that are dressed up like maids, okay, are also Native Americans too. So ritual and gutting them, taking them away from ritual was so important also. They were to learn and accept the white man's rituals. Okay, measurement changes. I thought this was important for us to bring out and talk about that, because very simply, these natives, they're not used to the white man's way of exactness and punctuality, let's say, okay? It's not a judgment against them. It's part of their life itself, that they relied upon nature, okay? The sun, the moon, and the stars, all right? To guide them, to direct them, and to figure out the time of day and whatever case may be. But of course, the white man wanted them to operate by a clock and by minutes and seconds and punctuality and being at the right place at the right time, okay? So they had to teach them about the clock, all right? And also in length and measurements itself, they needed to teach them, okay, yards and feet and inches, those kind of things itself. Because obviously, you take a look at it here, here are the kids that are digging a trench, all right? They're dressed like white kids, all right? But they are digging a trench, all right? And they need to learn about measurements. And when they tell them what an inch is, a foot, a yard, they need to understand that and know that. And especially, of course, that would become important when they were teaching them math, because they were teaching them the basics of education through math and science and those kind of things. And I'll talk to them. I have this little slide you have here about the kids in class, okay? And they were doing some math work right there at that particular time. So here was another disconnect and another way to bring them toward the white man's way of measuring and time and punctuality and exactness and preciseness. There was too much vagueness for the white man among the natives, and they relied too much upon inexactness, all right? Or using tactics, whether it be a rope or whatever it may be, to measure things or to gauge things itself. They needed to have the exactness, the preciseness of the white man. I still find it funny how, you know, in the United States, we use a measurement of inches and yards and feet. And if you go to the rest of the world, yeah, They don't operate under those things. They have a more exact way. But this is the white man's way. This is the American way itself. Okay, so too bad you measure that way. Okay, and liters and meters and things like that. This is not the white man's way. We're going to have yards and inches and feet and hit the road, Jack. All right, that's the way it's going to be. Okay. This I found fascinating when I got into it, people. And I want you to know that I never thought about this myself. But I think it's so important to understand that here again was another way of taking them away from, walking them away from their style of life and walking them toward white man's style of life. Now, I gave you some examples here. This is not a full-blown explanation of it, but just take a look at the white man's way itself, or the red man's way, excuse me, okay? The circular impact of the life itself. You take a look at the way that they dressed, okay? You take a look at the headband that they had for their feather, okay? You take a look at the belt and the beading, okay? And what cinched there around their waist for their pants or for their leggings or for their loincloth, whatever it may be itself. You look at their symbols that they used in their beadwork, all right, and in their weavings, all right. Circular was all part of it. The teepee, the shape of the sun, the moon, the sweat lodge, the sacred hoop, okay. Those of you that may not be familiar with that sacred hoop, and it was a hoop that was really kind of reminds me of a peace symbol is what it is. It could vary in size itself, okay? It was used for ceremonies, obviously, and it was used, they took something circular, I don't know what it was, I'm not sure if it was a piece of wood or whatever, and molded it, I suspect it was that, and then they covered it with porcupine twill, and they had taken the porcupine and they had dyed it, and so the outer rim of the circle was white, and then each of these lines coming off of it, one was red and one was black and one was green, I believe, okay? And they called it a sacred hoop, and it was used for various ceremonies. No more of that. We don't want anything tied to anything, or any ceremony, any customs, traditions, any ritual, tribal stuff you celebrated. We're out of that. We're away from that, okay? Now what we do is we take a look at linear. Now look at this slide, if you will, here, okay? How they're regimented, okay? How you would think this might be an army camp or base or whatever. They're all lined up. They're in rows. They're in straight lines, all right? They're standing at attention. Look at the way the trees have been planted in straight rows itself. And if you looked at a classroom, you have the desk, you have the windows, you have the rows, you have the tables in the room, you have the barracks, all right? Their whole life basically was lined up with a linear structure. So that again is a disassociation with the circular world of the natives and a driving toward, pushing them, taking them toward the linear world of the white man, okay? Linear is right, circular is wrong. Circular is red, linear is white. And that's the road that we're going to take. And it's, like I said, it's like an indoctrination. It's like a brainwashing. It's like, baptizing them in the white man's way itself, okay? Drenching them in it. All right, let's move on. Policies. Well, of course, we know the policies, the policies toward the natives by the white man is, okay, make a treaty with them and then break the treaty, all right? So you wonder why they're skeptical, why they question white man ways, and why they fight it, and why we have Indian wars against the white man, because very simply, how could you trust the white man? Remember the old native saying, white man speak with forked tongue, all right? I mean, they had a lot of great sayings. Like I love the Indian saying, I had it up in my room that said, never judge a man until you walk a mile in his moccasins. They had some very famous, very interesting, very potent kind of sayings in a sense itself. So we stole the land from them. We broke every treaty we established with them. And then we went ahead and we built the reservation system as a way to box them in, put them in. It's like camps. It's like the old camp again in itself. The concentration camp for the Nazis, all right, it's the precursor of that. Or it is like remember when World War II came along and we took and put these Japanese in detention camps. You may have one where you live at, but right here in Bismarck, North Dakota, we had a detention camp right on the east edge of town, which is what we call United Tribes today, okay? And it's run, I mean, it is associated with the Native Americans itself, but they actually shipped Japanese all the way out here and put them into this detention camp itself. Eerie, isn't it? Strange, eerie, whatever the case may be itself. Already talked about manifest destiny, about settling the frontier, and of course the Indian wars that went on, the death, the destruction. I mean, whether it be Wounded Knee, we wonder why we had Custer's Last Stand, okay? Because of the brutality of the white man toward the natives, okay? And it seemed like, take a look at the Black Hills as a situation in South Dakota. And I came from there, of course, so I know something more about it just from a kid growing up there. But everything was looking fine for the natives to hold on to the Black Hills and to keep them. Bingo, gold is discovered, and the white man couldn't drive them out soon enough. Same thing with Oklahoma and the Oklahoma Sooners. How they get driven out down there was because of Americans who went into that land area before the government actually established it, as an area to settle in itself. Look at the Trail of Tears driving the Cherokee out of Florida, and how many of them died on their way marching toward, moving them toward Oklahoma itself. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of a guy by the name of James Oglethorpe. James Oglethorpe way back was put in charge as the governor, the royal governor of Georgia. And get this, all right, we don't like to admit it, but again, we need to admit it. It's an actual fact, okay, that Georgia under Oglethorpe was established as a buffer colony. So what happened is that when there were people in the colonies up and down the East Coast, they got in trouble and were debtors, all right, and owed money or had problems with the government, whatever, they pushed them and the government resettled them down into Georgia. Then, of course, it became a buffer in a sense itself, a protection from people, other white people in the colonies, all right, because as the Seminoles would come north and raid into Georgia itself, they would just be killing off lifers anyway. They'd be killing off people who owed debts to society itself. Okay, just an example of something I wanted to share with you, sidelight there. All right, let's go on, continue on here. The children, okay? There was formal education, but please understand that it was not just educating, okay, by, book learning in itself, all right? By getting a formal education and studying science and math. There was vocational training. There was life skills training that went on itself that these children were going to put to. There was vocational kind of things so that they learned to do things with their hands. There was carpentry classes. There was welding classes and things like that. Again, please understand that depending upon the school itself, all right, like Carlisle in Pennsylvania was a leading school, Hampton in Virginia, another leading school, but they had charismatic leaders. And they had many of their students were students who volunteered actually to go to those schools. And so therefore they were, what shall I say? They were primed audience in a sense itself. And so they were teaching them not only book learning, okay, but trying to teach them some skills about sewing and cooking, cleaning, vocational kind of things itself. And like I said, the boys were There wasn't any auto mech class because we were still dealing with horse and buggy, but there was the carpentry classes, okay, that went on. And there was mechanical classes that went on so they could learn that. Then, of course, these students were not just living the life of a student, they were living the life of a worker also. So in other words, you had to contribute as a student, you had to contribute. And here's an example with that slide there of these young boys, well, young men, I guess I should say, they look like 16, 17, 15, somewhere around there, that were actually taking and cleaning the barracks itself. And of course, you had the girls who were in the kitchen and they were sewing, they were washing, they were ironing, they were cooking, helping to cook and prepare the meals itself. Now, don't get me wrong, they had staff people there, some to assist. But again, they felt that this disciplined them. This was a way to discipline them, to regiment them, to teach them certain skills itself that they needed to know to continue on living a full life in a sense itself. Okay. Next, I wanted to make mention to a couple of schools that we had here in North Dakota. I had some other slides, but we just didn't have time to put them in. All right, but these buildings don't exist. Okay, but Wahpeton is kind of in the southeast corner of our state. It's very close to the Red River, and then Fort Totten is out west here. Okay, and as I said earlier, there are a handful of schools, boarding schools that still exist, and one of them is still Fort Totten. Now they've changed their focus. I want you to understand that, but please understand, you know, it's like with every state that has Native American reservations, there are the reservation schools, obviously. So there are formal things that book learning and things like that are still being taught to these Native Americans. But that whole issue of the reservation, it was a mistake from the get-go also, all right? And so we've made so many mistakes with dealing with natives. It's like the idea, you know, how many times have you heard of instances where the white man has said, well, we'll just throw money at it and that will fix it. We'll just pitch money at it and money will solve all the problems, all right? And we still haven't learned that money is not the solution itself. As long as I mentioned that, maybe some of you remember this, and then again, maybe not. I remember it very well. Besides teaching world history, American history, and government, I was always fascinated and interested in things that happened within our government, so I follow it carefully, even today. And yet I'll never forget when Bill Clinton was serving as president, his first term as president. This was on national news, and some of you may remember that a group of natives moved into the BIA building in Washington, D.C. and occupied it, okay? Now, they didn't shoot anybody, okay? They just simply moved in and had a sit-in, all right? And occupied it. And so what does the government do? The BIA, I guess, whatever, said, what do you people want? And they said, we want $25,000. Really? So they gave them a check for $25,000 and they left the building. Okay. That's the way we've tried to deal with that Native American situation. It's never been a solution. Never. Okay. The reservations have never, ever, and never will be a solution to dealing with the Indian situation. All right. South Dakota. Those of you that are on from South Dakota might find it interesting that we had various schools there. Flandreau out in the eastern part of the state, Mount Marty, Mission in the western south central part of the state, Chamberlain, the central part, and the Pierre Indian Learning Center. Now, those are the only ones I could find listed. There may have been more of them. Here's an example. You can see how big this school is at Flandreau, okay? I was telling somebody recently that when I was a kid growing up in South Dakota, they didn't let the Catholic schools play in the state, in any of the state competitive activities. So what the Catholic schools did, there was enough of them, they put together their own state basketball tournament. And it was a biggie. And it was actually better than the public school tournament itself. And one of the things that made it so interesting and so good is that these natives would come in with their teams, whether it be Mount Marty or Mission or wherever it may be itself. And they were always leading the pack. They were always leading, and, you know, run and gun type of basketball, which we have seen again and again and again. And it made for such an interesting tournament. Okay. So let me leave it at there, but I wanted to share that story because that put an interesting twist, because those natives just could keep running and gunning and running and gunning. And it made for such interesting football or basketball, so much fun. Okay. Military regimentation, okay, and military organization. Here's the slide, shows you Holy Rosary School in Mission, South Dakota in 1900. The drill, all right, lined up, it looked like a bunch of soldiers or Marines or Army guys, all right, okay, GIs, all right, lined up, and there's your American flag for you. So because they were in barracks, all right, they wore uniforms, they were structured, they were taught, you know, that you respond to reveille and to bugles and to bells and whistles and to organized exercises and marching and parading and those kind of things itself, and a set schedule. Because of that set schedule, that white man schedule, you had to know time. You had to have a concept of time itself. When I mentioned that, you know, we've all heard of the old saying about, you know, being on Indian time. And it's a reality in a sense, it's a fact in a sense, because their time is their time. They operate on their own schedule, their own time. That's ingrained in them. That's part of their culture in a sense itself, okay? It's not white man's time, just as red man's time is not white man's time. There's a difference in time, the concept of time itself. So here again is a way to bring them around to the importance of time, scheduling, structure, discipline, marching, barracks, uniform, marching them toward the white man's way, taking them away from the red man's way. All right. Now, of course, the question that lies out there is that, were there any success stories? Not too many. No, not too many. Like I said, I had mentioned Carlisle, which was in Pennsylvania, and Hampton, which was in Virginia itself. There just was not a lot of success stories to it, because innately from the very beginning, this is a flawed system. This is a flawed concept, a flawed idea. In other words, there's nothing wrong with educating them, okay? But educating them as to their own culture, not trying to take things away from them. The idea is that if you want real success, okay, then what you do is that you dovetail with their language and their clothing and their customs and their rituals, all right? Don't try to steal something from them, all right? What if, again, the shoe was on the other foot and it was the red man taking these things away from the white man itself? How would any of us feel? We would feel like we were being robbed of something that was very important to us, that was intricate, that was a part of us in a sense itself. When I would teach about slavery in U.S. history, and I would do a little unit for the kids on the colors of black and white. And we'd do a little analysis on the difference between black and white itself. And then I try to teach them about kind of the stigma that's tied to the color black and that which is attached to white. You know, white being virginal, sweet, innocent, pure, on and on and on. And black being evil, sinister, whatever, all the way down, bad, all that stuff itself. And then I showed them how that is part of our language, okay? How we take and we have brought that racism even into our language, and the negativity about black as opposed to white being good, white, the white man's way, white man's skin, and black being negative in a sense itself. Once we pass through that and go through it and I'd get them through it, then I would say to them, okay, let's pose this question to you. Let me pose this question. What would have happened if Black people had been the majority in Europe and white people had been in Africa? Would white people have become the Black man's slave? Oh, if you don't think that didn't bring about some interesting discussion and some questions and so on. I always loved that, going through it, and the kids enjoyed it too. They learned a lot. Now, I don't need to go through why it was a failure. I've been teaching you that the whole time, why this system, the boarding school system, was a failure. But like I said, the successes they had were few and far in between, and it could have been, again, because of some leader and their charisma. They knew the right things to say at the right time, and they had a right way of dealing with people itself. And like I said, they had a captive audience. Most of these students were individuals who wanted to attend the boarding school itself. Okay. Now the question, of course, that is posed is what happens after graduation itself? They're going to, again, take a look at this slide that I've got for you here about how they're dressed and regimented and uniformed. Look at their hairstyle. Look how short the guy's hair is cut, okay? Everybody is neat and trim and, regimented, the European style of dress and so on. The one girl, a couple girls with bonnets on and things like that. There you go, okay? So the question, of course, is that, okay, once we send you off to the reservation, okay, we are hoping, all right, that what's going to happen is that you're going to maintain those ways, that you're going to stick with what we've taught you, book learning, manners, all those kind of things. But the white man realized there would be a lot of pressure upon them to go back to the old ways, because they're right on the reservation itself. And so the question for these graduates became, which way do I go? Do I maintain my white man's rituals and customs and so on and language, or do I revert back to my native ways itself? So what the government did is they would send in what I called a follow-up inspector. And this inspector would come to them and track them in a sense itself, ask them questions, ask other people questions, and find out, okay, this is the proof is in the pudding. We want to find out if they're actually doing what we taught them to do. And so that became a very important part of the program itself. Now you're saying, well, what kind of questions would they have been asking of these graduates? Short and simple things like, are you self-supporting, or are you relying upon government rations, food to support you? Are you farming? Okay, are you actually going out there? Because we tried to teach you agricultural methods. So are you actually going out there and farming, planting crops and things like that? What about the home that you live in? Are you living in a hut? Are you living in something that's got a dirt floor to it? Or are you actually living in a built structure with a floor in it, okay, a solid floor in it? Are you sleeping in a bed, or are you sleeping on the floor itself? Is there a clock in the house, all right? Are you married with someone, or are you just living with them, okay? Are you practicing your Christian beliefs itself? Do you attend church? Do you go to Bible school, or do your children go to Bible school? Are your children enrolled in school itself? So these are the questions, okay, that would have been pondered or would have been put to these graduates to find up as a follow-up itself, okay? Are you following the white man's way? This is what we want from you, and we're expecting it from you, that you should do these things, all right? After spending all this time and money on you to groom you toward the white man's culture, we want to make sure that you are doing it. Now, I wanted to share with you just a little story here I got from one of these books I was looking at. And it was basically a story of a guy, a Native American. His name was James Bearsheart. And it's just a short little story I'd like to share with you, okay? But this is the story of him. In the spring of 1881, Hampton Institute said farewell to one of its favorites. His name, James Bearsheart, now in his late 20s and one of Pratt's original Florida boys, quote unquote, was going home. Here surely was a living embodiment of reformers of the vision of before and after Indians. As Indian supervisor Booker T. Washington wrote in the Southern Workman, Bearsheart, before his capture, had been clad in a blanket and moccasins, with his long hair flowing down his back, his ears jingling with earrings, and his tomahawk and bow and arrows swinging from his side. Now, 6 years later, instead of the blanket, he wears back a neat suit of school gray uniform decorated with a sergeant's and color bears stripes. Instead of the tomahawk, he takes back a chest of carpenter tools. Instead of his bow and arrow, he takes the Bible and many other good volumes. Okay, his long hair and moccasins has long since been forgotten. Instead of the weak, dirty, ignorant price of humanity that he was, with no correct ideas of his life or the next, his only ambition being to fight the white man, he goes back a strong, decent Christian man with the rudiments of an English education and hands to earn himself a living at the carpenter's bench or on the farm itself. Sounds like a great success story, doesn't it, in the sense itself? But here's the end of James Bearsheart.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you please repeat?
Sorry about that. But in late September, Pratt received word that Bearsheart is at present on the sick list, having overheard himself in helping unload a train. Whether this condition contributed to his contraction of TB is not clear. In any event, his health continued to deteriorate. In January of 1882, less than a year after his return, he died. Until that time, the young Cheyenne had completely fulfilled Pratt's and Armstrong's expectation. All right, I wanted to share that story with you. I thought it was interesting to see after all that work and time. I just threw this little slide up for you. The last shall be first and the first last, Curtis Act of 1924. And then I wanted you to take a look at this in case you're interested. These were my guidebooks, okay? And I strongly recommend you check them out. This Education for Extinction, excellent book, excellent resource book, lots of information. I read it from cover to cover and I strongly recommend it's American Indians and the Boarding School Experience. And then Stringing Rosaries. And of course, this woman, Denise, I will not attempt to I'll murder her name. But anyway, she is a North Dakotan. I believe she's of the Chippewa tribe. She has her PhD. She is retired now. She worked at both the universities here, major universities in North Dakota. And her grandparents were products of the system, the boarding school system. And she took this title, Stringing Rosaries, because at times that's what natives did, is they did weavings and they made rosaries, strung rosaries, so that they could earn extra money, so they had money to buy food, because there wasn't always enough food for them, enough proper clothing, shelter, things like that. And so they were making money on their own to survive, basically. And so that's a very, very good, that came out in 2019. So it's a rather current book. And again, I strongly recommend that might be something that you want to check out and look into, okay? Denise K. I won't try, whatever, okay, because I'll murder it anyway itself. Now, last thing before we go to questions here, because I said I would provide your time with some questions, is this. When it's all said and done, and we come to the end of the road in a sense itself, we can't change the past. There's nothing going to be done to change the past whatsoever. But the question is this, what should we do then? And you heard Deb Holland speak about we need, in a sense itself, to chronicle what information we have yet from the ancestors, or possibly some of those that went through the boarding school system. We need to chronicle that. We need to have that information down, okay? We need to learn from it in a sense itself. It's not like these children that were put into these graves and who, like I said, who were put there because of abuse, not being properly fed, being beaten, being sexually abused, committing suicide, those kind of things itself. We need an oral history. We need a documented oral history of people who have some kind of direct or indirect connection to the boarding school system itself. We need to have the government, just as the Pope is doing right now, own up to the idea that we did this to these indigenous people and we have to take responsibility. That we blew it when it came to reservations. We blew it when it came to the boarding school system itself. We need to seek out these survivors of these boarding schools, or whether it's their ancestors, and try to provide them counseling for recovery, okay? So they get some help that way. We need to seek out perpetrators in case there are some. And you're saying, aren't they all dead? Well, the Jews are still looking for Nazis, aren't they? All right. And every once in a while, one still pops up. They're old, but they're still out there. So they need to seek out perpetrators and to take an active role that our government does in trying to rectify, or at least show that they care. And we need to locate these graves and identify these individuals, these young children, and give them a proper burial on Indian land. And we need to support their families in a sense itself. I said, natives need to realize all across this nation that there needs to be a sincere effort by Americans to right the wrongs so that healing can occur. Notice that I didn't say to you that we need to pay them, that we need to put money out there, throw money at it. That is not a solution, and it will not be part of the solution itself. Well, as they used to say, amen, hallelujah, praise the Lord, and pass the ammunition. I have come to the end of my presentation, and I'm willing to open this up. I know we don't have a lot of time yet, but I'm certainly hope that you have some questions, and I will do the best in handling them. Okay, the ball is in your court, as they say.
We do have a couple questions in the chat, as well as two people with their hands up, and I think we'll cover those first. Marcy Wells, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, weren't the reservations pushed, they were pushed on land that wasn't really arable? I mean, it wasn't the best land in the state. And how did they expect them to farm when, they were on dry land with that many resources? Wasn't that true?
You're right. You're absolutely right. I'll give you an example. If you look at the state of North Dakota, we built the Garrison Dam, okay, back in the 1950s, okay? And what happened, of course, is that the Missouri River is going to flood the lowlands. Well, where were the natives living? In the lowlands. And so what that did is it forced them, by building the dam and flooding this area, it forced them out of the lowlands. So they had to go up into the higher land itself, and that was not the best land itself. So therefore, in a sense, the government is saying, okay, we're going to relocate you. And if you don't relocate, you're going to get flooded in the sense itself. And I'm not saying that we didn't pay money and provide building of towns, like we have Newtown, North Dakota, which was, again, a town relocated, so they were away from the water itself. I mean, at least we're better than the Chinese. Remember when they opened that Three Gorges Dam or started to build that? They just told them, pack your bag and get the hell out, because if you don't, too bad. We're not paying any money for your land. Just move, because we need this dam. So I don't know if that answers your question there, but it's the same kind of thing in itself. There's no consideration for their land and for the best land itself. So yeah, what a sloppy expectation in a sense itself.
Okay,
Other questions?
one
Go ahead.
question from the chat, and then we'll get to Jan.
Yeah.
One question from the chat: did the children run away?
There was just a little section on that about children running away. Don't get me wrong. There were children who did run away, but again, they would seek out trying to track them down, and you know what would happen once they captured them? They'd be brought back, and they would be put in jail, and they would be beaten. Somebody asked me in the other class, well, what about these parents that basically stood up and said, you're not taking my children? And I remember one case in particular with the Hopi Indians, that there were many fathers that refused to let their children being taken from them. You know what they did? They locked them up. They put them in jail. They locked them up and said, we're taking them anyway. So whether you like it or not, we're locking your children up, or locking you up, and we're taking your children. So yeah, that was what would happen to those children. Yeah, they would be beaten, and they would be put in jail and reoriented in a sense itself, orientated to get back into the swing of things. Yes, there were children trying to escape.
All right, Jan, would you like to ask your question, Jan Lee?
Well, it's really more of a comment. I just wanted to suggest that there is another major outcome that is still evident today, and those are the physiological changes from all the chronic stress and trauma that the children experienced and that all the Native Americans experienced. And we now understand things like psychoneuroimmunology. And there is a theory that the reason that there's so much type 2 diabetes in certain of the Native American tribes can be traced back to the cortisol changes from so much trauma and chronic stress. And I think that this is a very, very complex. Anything dealing with the Native Americans is very complex. There's so much context to it. There are so many different perspectives. And I think that there's probably more work to try to understand it.
True. I agree with you. Definitely. You made a good point there.
Kester, would you like to unmute and speak?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
So a thought just came to mind about your picture about regalia versus dressing up like a white man. I work for a state agency. I'm Navajo myself, and kind of made me think how we're still conditioning people, or especially natives, of what professionalism looks like, and we're still dressing up like white people and whatnot. But anyways, that was a thought in my head. So I have a question. I know you said something about disease, the TB, and how there was another disease that affected vision loss and stuff like that. Did you come across any evidence? I'm visually impaired, or I'm actually blind myself, and I always wondered about how people with disability or people that are blind were treated, and I wonder how much of those have literally just died and buried instantly, kind of thing.
Well, I didn't read anything. I didn't come across in my readings, my research, anything particular about that. But I would tell you this, that because of the way that, now again, we have to understand medicine back then was not what medicine is today. So there wasn't, excuse me, the drugs that were available to treat some of these diseases and stuff. But when you take a look at just how poorly they were housed and clothed and fed, it's no wonder that they got sick. And I can just surmise that the idea is that if you had a disability of some type, whether it be physical or mental, basically you were told to ignore it because we're going to ignore it. Now, I don't have that documented any place, but I just think that's a supposition, a summary that, or a conclusion we can reach very simply because of the information we have about the other diseases and how rampant that spread and how devastating it was for them. And again, just the attitude that everyone that dies, all right, is just one less force to have to deal with.
I do want to make sure that we respect Mr. Pinn's time here. There are a lot of really great comments and people who are very passionate about this topic in our chat. I will stay on here for a few minutes after we're finished so that you can scroll through the chat and look at it, and also click on those links so you have those to look at later. There are some really important things on here. Can we take one more question, Pat? I do have one.
Certainly,
okay.
Certainly.
Okay, Dorothy, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I would. Hello, thank you
Hi.
for the presentation.
Certainly.
I am in Pennsylvania and I am about an hour away from Carlisle.
Okay.
So I'm very familiar with kind of the mother school, which I don't know, I'm not saying that positively,
No.
but the mother school that kind of started it all, Richard Henry Pratt. And I don't know if you mentioned this, I had to step away for a minute or two, but there was a documentary done called Home from School. And that looks at the Native American tribes that are taking back the children that were buried at Carlisle. I don't know if they're going to do that at other Native American boarding schools because I'm guessing others also had burying grounds, but Carlisle does. And so the tribes are coming back and they're taking taking their children and taking them home. And the documentary is called Home from School. So I just wanted to share that. If you shared it, I apologize. I did step away, but if you did, I wanted people to know about it. And
that's good.
it. Thank you. Thank you for the collaboration. I appreciate being able to zoom in from Pennsylvania.
Well, we're glad you zoomed in. Okay, we appreciate your presence.
Thank you.
I do see, I saw some people with thumbs up when you were talking about that book here too. Again, I'm gonna respect Pat's time. I really appreciate everyone coming here. I will look through the chat and make sure that if there were any questions that were unanswered, that we send those to Pat. And I will stay on for a few minutes here to make sure that you have time to check out the chat and look at some of those links. Also, I've enclosed a link to our survey. We'd love it if you would take a look or take a quick minute to fill out our survey and tell us how we're doing. Thank you so much for being here. Pat, thank you. Absolutely great information. We have so much to learn. We are people who want to learn. So thank you.
You betcha. Thanks a lot, Thea. I really enjoyed this, and there may be a follow-up. I would keep that in mind because now we see the Pope with his trip across Canada and with Deb Holland running the show there in the Interior Department. Maybe there'll be a follow-up in a couple of years and I can say, hey, yeah, we committed a lot of sins, but we're trying to mend our ways. And that's something is better than nothing, right? You bet.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Pat's a real tribute to his profession. Thank you. And I'm proud to have played a teeny tiny part in that training.
Ed, were you Pat's teacher?
I was.
Oh, funny.
As well as a family friend of the family.
Right. Oh my goodness.
Thea, may I ask you a question?
Jan, yes?
Yes, I'm trying to download some of these links and I'm not the most computer techie person. So I managed to press, I mean, I've got it where it says download, but where does it go?
It should open up a page on your internet browser. And they would each, if you clicked on each of them, you would have a page on your internet browser that would open up and you'd be able to have those.
I'm trying. It's not working. Well, maybe it is, and I don't know.
I can also send out some links to everybody who, to the whole list. I can try to, I'll go through the chat. This has been an incredible chat. There's some really great information in here, and I will try to pull all of that and send it out to everyone.
Oh, Thea, that would be an incredible thing for you to do. Thank you.
Sure, give me a day or two. But
okay, and where did you say the evaluation is?
I'll just put it in here again, just a second.
I was busy trying to download.
Sure, no problem.
I tried to
again, if you just click on that, you should be able to get to our evaluation. And Wanda says, go under files and press downloads. That's great advice.
Whoops, but you put the survey in the chat?
I did.
Okay, I'm just trying to get to it. I'm just hitting the button too hard. There it goes. Okay, oh, then it moved.
Oh, Dennis Banks talked about running away from boarding school in the documentary, A Good Day to Die. I remember Dennis Banks from when I was a kid. And Clint, whoever you are, I'm fascinated by whatever work you're doing in your truck there. I've been keeping an eye on you. It's been interesting. We're glad to have you here. All right, I hope everyone had a chance to get a hold of the information they needed. I will send some out too. Thank you, everybody. Dad, I'll probably see you later. Okay. Unless anybody has a last minute, don't sign off yet. I will. Okay.
So Thea, this is Geraldine. So did you say your dad's on today?
Yeah, my dad, it says Mickey Miller, but that's my dad.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom's also a member of the OLLI at ISU program. So.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
It sounds, well, Bobby Geis was too, because her dad was the presenter for the Montana one.
Right. Cool.
That was fun.
Keep it in the family.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll have a great evening, and thanks for joining us.